girls. All right, so I'm not quite done with that one that we started yesterday, but I'm gonna show you this one. I think there's some things going on in this that will help you with your landscape a little bit, because it's really use of watercolor that you need to be good with. And watercolor, as I told you before, it is not gonna let you make a lot of mistakes. It just doesn't have it built in. So you have to use it in a manner that you really control it. And it is really a lot better to work slow enough that you build it up rather than try to put too much color on it. That's what usually will kill a watercolor piece. So with this one, I was putting in some darks because I was using this for last class as well. We got a little bit through it, but I feel like as I'm looking at it, I need to go back and add some of these shapes. One thing I want to ask you guys, why are we using such a restricted palette? Because you're going to get to use 4 colors. Do any of you know what those 4 colors are? Yes. Why are we using such a restricted palette? What is the advantage to that? What do you think is an advantage to using a restricted palette rather than having every color at your disposal? Maybe that might make you think about it in a different manner, but there's actually a bigger value that sort of is built into it. Does anybody know what that might be? Can you figure it out? What do you think, Rachel?
You're able to mix the colors more intricately instead of just choosing a bland purple that is already chosen for you.
Maybe, but you could take, if you were using all the colors, you could choose to mix them. So what does having a restricted palette really do for you? Think about it. What do you think? You sort of tapped it. What were you saying? In a manner, you can naturalize your colors more, but why is that? Like, think about the 4 colors. You got brown, blue, red, yellow. And of course, watercolor doesn't have white. What can you do with those colors? Right, you make every other color. Okay, so if you've got these 3, the primary colors, which are 3 of them, and the brown is really only in there to make optical black, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've got these 3 primary colors, and all the other colors that you build are made of those 3 colors, doesn't that give you the opportunity to balance your palette of your piece, where you're not worrying about some odd color coming in and taking up too much attention and becoming a sore thumb? You know what I'm saying? That's really the value of using a restricted palette. It's actually easier to do something with a restricted palette than to have a lot of color. Because then, now you have to build your balance a different manner if you're using a whole lot of different colors. And that's why for this, we're going to use those other watercolors, but for this you can plan to only have those 4. And you can do whatever you want with those 4, to tell you the truth. They're pretty primary, the ones that are in those little watercolor containers, so they give you a lot of options. Also, when you choose your brush, notice I'm using this brush a lot. This kind of brush has a lot of, it has a lot of things about it that allow you to use it in a lot of forms. Like, I can put down a really broad stroke with that brush, or I can put down a line with that brush if I don't let the paper move. Okay, I can even put a dot down with that brush because of that angled edge. And so, whereas in a big area, I don't want these little tiny line-like strokes that a brush like this might create. I don't want that. I want to have a broader stroke, and so having this brush allows me to do that. And I still can do most things with this brush where I don't ever have to go to that brush. Does that make sense? I save a brush like that, I use at the very end. I gotta get some yellow on this. remember, as you work, like I'm really staining this color in here, so it's not mixing with what's dry very much. In order for it to do that, I'd have to put more pigment down. But if I put more pigment down, I'll lose some of the translucence I need that I want to keep in here. So you have to make some decisions, and you notice I'm being careful to leave some white in place too. I'm not losing the white. I haven't, the only brown that's in here so far is in these darker marks, which I think I'm going to go ahead and try to put a bit of a balance on those dark marks, because they're bothering me that they're so overwhelming. So I'm going to go in and actually start carving a background in here. And again, this brush will allow me to kind of give this hair pattern on the edge and still pull off these big strokes, which is one reason I like this brush. As you work with media, you'll get where you like certain kinds of tools better than others. Some will be something that you really appreciate, and you might dislike this kind of brush. That's something that experience will kind of tell you. But for me, I feel like this brush gives me a lot of the kind of control I want, and gives me some opportunities of putting in both a fine line and a broad stroke pretty quickly. And that's one reason I like it. If you're doing something like an animal, or in some of your work that you're going to be trying to watercolor, you want to kind of go with the textural pattern of whatever you're doing. So like if the stroke is going away, it seems like the texture's going away, then move your brush like that. But in a broad area like what I'm putting in, I'm actually trying not to develop a big direction in the stroke work. I'm trying to let it be a little more just kind of wet looking, so that it doesn't become distracting. And a bigger brush would allow me to do that better, but then a bigger brush wouldn't necessarily allow me to do the finer stuff I need to do. When I just dipped that, I was just making sure that my brush didn't have too much more water on it than I wanted. And remember, if you want to practice this, which I would encourage you to practice a little bit, just render a photo like I'm doing. Like make a copy. It really doesn't matter. You're not claiming it. Get a copy. Of whatever you want to do, whatever you want to practice with, and render that photo. It's fast, and it gives you some practice on just applying the watercolor, and that's the value of it, because there's a skill just in being able to put watercolor down, that if you can master that, you'll be very pleased with it. For one thing, like I said, it allows you to do some things that other people really enjoy looking at, which, let's face it, we like it when people like what we're doing, right? We like the compliments they give us. And this kind of media really kind of opens up the door to that for you, because it can be very colorful, and you can impress your family and friends. Notice how this blue is walking through the colors that are in here, so that these don't seem so harsh now. And that was the reason I was putting it in there, because to tell you the truth, I was having a little bit of trouble myself looking at that and feeling like I was going to be able to continue to balance it. And that's the other thing you got to think about as you're working on something. You have to understand how to keep it, visually balanced. And I'm not really working with the colors on the image too much, except for the little lion cub, because those don't really matter. You don't have to render true to the color, as long as the color you choose works, and as long as you're applying the media the way you should. So again, I'm really working against having any kind of pattern that is directional as I'm putting this on. Are you guys noticing how I'm letting the brush kind of move around in a manner that's not all the same direction? I'm definitely avoiding that long, linear kind of stroke that's giving you this pattern of striping. Try not to do that. That just, you won't like it when you're done. I'm also letting it be darker in places than, one place more than another, just because it gives you a more interesting background, I think. So, this now allows me to understand this piece a little bit. Does it help you all? Okay. It's still not finished. I mean, depending on how dark I want to get, and I am going to balance that with a little more pigment on this other side. But getting this to darken up is a buildup of pigment. Like, it's not that you can't get a really dark translucent color in the first go around. You might be able to, but if you mess with it and you really put it on heavy and you put a lot of water in there, you may lose control in a manner that you have a hard time getting it back. So at least until you get more comfortable with it, try to keep control. And that's why light layers that are really translucent will work best for you. I'm going to put more red in this piece. I feel that it needs some red. So I'm going to use some red as an undercolor on this. I'm going to put this thing on the log because it makes sense to me. So for now, I'm mixing this red with the yellow that was already on this palette. I'm just going to pull. Why do you think I'm wanting to put some red in this? What makes me want to put it there? Anybody have an idea? Now this I am doing more linear. Why would that's another question that I'll ask you after you tell me why I'm putting the red there.
Is it because the yellow and the blue are opposite colors?
No, it's not that. There's something else that's making me feel I need more red in this log that eventually it's going to be a log. It seems like a good place to put it. What would Yeah, I need more red in the cat. So if I leave it just there, it's going to be a balance problem. I need it other places, so I'm going to lay it in as an undercolor on this log. I mean, I'm going to put other things in. Why then am I doing this long streak, which I just got done saying to you all? That's what I would avoid that in a background. What's making me do it here? Not really. What do you think?
The texture of the log?
Right. You can kind of imitate the texture of a log. I'm not going to worry about all these. It looks like this cub was using this log to sharpen its claws on. I'm not going to worry about that because I don't feel that that's going to really make the image stronger when I'm done with it. So, I can make decisions to leave things out, but the linear quality of the stroke kind of promotes the idea that this is a log, and it does differentiate itself from that. And then underneath this, my tendency will be to go with a cool, dark color, and I might throw some greens in here, which would make sense in this environment to get him surrounded by some greenery, because they do live in an area where they would have stuff like that. So, but by putting these two colors in, I can open up the rest of my palette and understand it better. And that's one of the things I'm doing. I'm trying to understand how far along I can go with these reds, like in this tongue. How deep of a red will work there. And by putting that other red in there, it gives me some understanding of that. And it allows me to balance as I go. And there's some red in these browns of his eyes, which I'm going to put as an undercolor right now as well. And I'm using this pretty thin, but because I've already got a layer there, it's starting to build up some color. Does that make sense to you guys? And again, notice as it builds up, you don't really want to lose the balance, and you want it to feel like it's kind of finishing itself together. Why not just finish one little part? What would be the downside to that? What do you think, Rachel?
Then you would have to keep everything in alignment with that finished part.
Right. You would have to somehow carry that whole thing across. And like, let's say somebody came in right now and they're like, you're done. You're done with that. You have no more time to work on it. I can actually say, that's fine, I'm done anyway. I've got it in a state. I could claim this is done. I know I want to do more to it. But I don't need to reveal that. If somebody wants to press me into being finished, right, I can say, okay, here's what you get, it's done. So there's a value of working it all as one piece, because at the end of the day, it develops in a natural manner that you don't try to create one little part and then build the rest of it to it. You have this thing that kind of works as a total piece. That is a problem many of you guys experience too, where you tend to work one little spot. Who thinks they have that problem? Yeah. Has it worked for you very well? It feels like it will work well, doesn't it? But then when it comes right down to it, it doesn't. Okay. How many of you think you can do something with watercolor today? That you actually could render something in watercolor today with what you know right now?
I can attempt it.
Well, I think we should attempt it.
Yeah.
You can,
Yeah.
go ahead and turn that off.